Labeled an ugly high school dropout and disowned by my wealthy family of doctors, I showed up at my sister's $1 million wedding 11 years later. My mother immediately demanded to know why a defect was ruining their perfect aesthetic. My sister screamed for security to toss me out, but when her new aristocratic husband saw me, he did not call the police. He shoved his bride away, bowed to me, and trembled in absolute terror. I just smiled and said, "You have no idea, do you? My name is Naomi, and I am 29 years old." The sun was setting over a breathtaking private estate in Malibu, casting a warm golden light across the manicured lawns. I stood in the exclusive VIP section holding a simple glass of sparkling water. The air smelled of expensive floral arrangements and ocean salt. A string quartet played a soft classical melody in the background, entertaining the hundreds of elite guests. These were prominent surgeons, hospital board members, and wealthy socialites dressed in designer gowns and bespoke suits. It was the perfect picture of high society elegance until a voice I had not heard in 11 years shattered the peace. "Why is this defect here?" The words cut through the music like a knife. I turned to see my mother, Dr. Patricia Washington, marching toward my table. She wore a custom emerald green gown that screamed generational wealth and success, but her face was twisted into a mask of pure, unfiltered disgust. The heavy diamond necklace resting against her collarbone sparkled in the evening light, a piece I recognized from my childhood that she always wore when she wanted to project absolute authority. The crystal champagne flute slipped from her hand and shattered on the marble floor, drawing the attention of everyone nearby. She did not even look down at the broken glass. Her eyes were locked on me, filled with the same cold, calculating disappointment that had haunted my entire childhood. I said, "Why are you here?" she demanded, her voice rising loud enough to make sure the wealthy crowd could hear every single insulting word. "You are an ugly high school grad who brings nothing but shame to the Washington medical legacy." The surrounding guests immediately fell silent. Heads turned in our direction, their eyes wide with shock and morbid curiosity. I did not flinch or shrink away. Her eyes scanned my dress, looking for cheap fabric or frayed seams, anything she could use to mock me. She found nothing because my dress was a custom design worth more than her entire jewelry collection, but her prejudice blinded her to the quality. To her, I would always be the worthless teenager she had discarded. I simply took a slow sip of my water and met her furious gaze. "You have a lot of nerve showing your face among decent people," she continued. "We are a family of healers, of highly respected leaders in the African American community. We save lives and uphold a standard of Black excellence that you could never comprehend, and you are nothing but a stain on our perfect record. A pathetic dropout who could not even handle the pressure of basic college courses. You do not belong at this table. You do not belong in this family." I looked at the woman who had given birth to me, 11 years of absolute silence, and these were her first words to me. There was no warmth, no motherly concern, only a vicious need to protect her social standing. She wanted to humiliate me, to remind me of my place at the very bottom of her pristine world. But the scared one, 8-year-old girl she had thrown away, was long gone. Before I could respond to her outburst, the crowd parted again. This time, it was the bride herself. My younger sister, Chloe, stormed across the marble patio. She was 25 years old and looked like a princess in a custom diamond-encrusted wedding gown that easily cost more than most people earn in a decade. But the arrogant scowl on her face ruined the fairy tale illusion completely. 2 large security guards trailed closely behind her, their hands resting on their radios. Chloe had always been the golden child, the one who eagerly absorbed our parents' toxic ambitions. She had spent her entire life stepping on my fingers to climb higher on her pedestal. As she approached her gown dragging across the pristine marble floor, I remembered all the times she had stolen my achievements. She had built her entire identity on being the successful doctor-daughter, contrasting my supposed failure. Seeing me here, calm and composed, threatened that carefully constructed narrative. "Mom, what is going on?" Chloe demanded before her eyes finally locked onto me. She stopped dead in her tracks, her jaw dropping in shock before curling into a cruel, familiar sneer. You actually had the audacity to crash my wedding." "Hello, Chloe. Congratulations on your big day," I said smoothly, keeping my voice perfectly calm and devoid of the intimidation they were trying so desperately to inflict on me. "Save your fake pleasantries," Chloe snapped, stepping closer so she could glare down at me with absolute contempt. "You are not invited. tossing you to the streets 11 years ago was not a clear enough message for you. Get this trash out of my sight before my new in-laws see her." The security guards hesitated, looking between Chloe's furious expression and my calm, unwavering demeanor. I looked at my sister, taking in the entitled tilt of her chin. 11 years ago, on a freezing winter night, she had stood in the doorway of our Atlanta mansion laughing while our parents threw my belongings into the snow. I was 18 years old. I had just told them that I did not want to take the medical college admission tests. I wanted to build a business instead. In the Washington family, where every generation boasted chief medical officers and elite surgeons choosing business over medicine, was considered the ultimate betrayal. My father had ripped my passport to shreds, and my mother had declared me dead to them. They threw me out with exactly $0 to my name, promising that I would end up begging on the streets within a month. Now, Chloe was trying to recreate that exact moment of absolute power. She wanted to prove that she was still the golden child, the successful doctor who had done everything right while I was just the failed outcast. "You heard her," my mother ordered the guards, her tone dripping with authority. "This girl is a trespasser. She is a disgraced high school dropout who is probably here to beg for money. Remove her immediately. Throw her out the back service entrance where she belongs." I did not move an inch. I placed my glass on the table and looked directly at Chloe. "I am not here to beg for anything, Chloe. I am simply enjoying the sunset on a beautiful piece of property." Chloe let out a harsh, mocking laugh that echoed across the silent patio. "Enjoying the property? Do you even know where you are? This is a private luxury resort, not a public park for homeless dropouts. My husband's family is old money. They are pure, upper-class white elites. If they see a pathetic, uneducated relative like you lingering around the Champagne Tower, it will humiliate me and ruin my perfect day." She turned to the guards, her voice reaching to hysterical, demanding pitch. I said, "Grab her. Physically throw her out if you have to. Do your jobs." The guards finally stepped forward, reaching out to grab my arms. The guests watched in stunned silence, waiting for the inevitable physical altercation. My mother wore a triumphant smirk, anticipating my absolute humiliation. But before the guards' hands could even brush the fabric of my dress, a panicked, desperate voice shouted from the crowd. "Stop right there. Do not touch her." The crowd parted for a third time. Spencer Sterling, the groom, pushed his way to the front. He was a tall, handsome man, 30 years old, wearing a bespoke tuxedo. He came from a long line of wealthy generational elites, the exact kind of family my parents were so desperate to impress. But right now, Spencer was breathing heavily, a fine sheen of sweat glistening on his forehead. He looked like he had just run a marathon to get across the lawn. Spencer Sterling was a man who understood power. As a director of acquisitions, he spent his days analyzing corporate hierarchies and identifying absolute authority. He knew exactly who signed his paychecks. He knew the ruthless corporate structure of Apex Health Partners, and he knew that the woman standing before him in a simple, elegant dress was the ultimate apex predator of the healthcare investment world. His terror was not an act. It was the primal fear of a man watching his entire career, his wealth, and his future dangling over a precipice. Chloe's face instantly softened into a sweet, victimized pout as she rushed over and clung tightly to his arm. "Spencer, honey, thank goodness you are here. This crazy woman crashed our reception. She is my estranged sister. The failure I told you about. The guards are moving too slowly. Tell them to call the police and have her arrested immediately." But Spencer did not look at Chloe. He did not look at the guards. His eyes were locked entirely on me, and the color was draining from his face so fast he looked like he might pass out right there on the marble floor. "Spencer, call the police right now." Chloe whined, tugging aggressively at his sleeve. Spencer reacted in a way that made the entire venue gasp in unison. He violently shoved Chloe's hand away, pushing his new bride aside as if she had physically burned him. Chloe stumbled backward, her heavy diamond gown catching on a chair, her eyes wide with absolute shock and humiliation. Spencer did not even check to see if she had fallen. He took 2 stumbling, unsteady steps toward me, his hands shaking visibly at his sides, to the utter disbelief of the 500 elite guests. Watching this proud, wealthy groom folded his body at the waist, bowing to me at a perfect 90 degrees angle. His voice trembled with raw, unadulterated terror when he finally spoke. "I am so sorry. Please forgive them. They do not know what they are doing." Chloe let out a high-pitched, furious shriek. "Spencer, have you lost your mind? Why are you bowing to this piece of trash? Defend me." Spencer whipped his head around his eyes, blazing with a fear so intense it silenced her instantly. "Shut your mouth, Chloe. How dare you? You have no idea what you have just done. This woman is—" I raised a single finger into the air. The gesture was slight, completely silent, but it carried the weight of an absolute, undeniable command. Spencer snapped his mouth shut so fast his teeth clicked. He swallowed hard, keeping his head lowered, too terrified to finish his sentence or make another sound. I stepped forward, the heels of my shoes clicking softly against the marble patio. The silence in the venue was absolute. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the ocean breeze seemed to hold its breath as everyone waited to see what would happen next. I looked at my mother, whose mouth was hanging open in stunned disbelief. I looked at Chloe, who was staring at her trembling husband in complete bewilderment, unable to comprehend why the man she married was acting like a frightened servant. I smiled warmly, a smile that carried years of patience and perfectly executed strategy. "You have no idea, do you?" The words hung in the air, heavy and loaded with 11 years of unspoken history and pain. I watched the confusion wash over my mother's face, quickly replaced by a furious, defensive indignation. The daughter they had thrown away like garbage was standing before them, commanding the absolute submission of the wealthy groom they had been so proud to secure for their golden child. The power dynamic they had relied on for their entire lives was shattering before their very eyes, and they were completely powerless to stop it. "What is the meaning of this?" The booming, authoritative voice belonged to my father, Dr. Richard Washington. He shoved his way to the front of the stunned crowd, his face purple with rage. My father possessed a commanding presence that demanded submission from everyone around him. In the operating room, he was a god. In our household, he was an absolute dictator. He carried his status like a weapon, using his position as chief of surgery to crush anyone who dared to question him. As he marched through the crowd, his heavy footsteps echoed with the same oppressive weight I remembered from the night he kicked me out. He was accustomed to solving problems by throwing his wealth and title at them. Seeing a problem he could not immediately solve, a problem named Naomi, standing calmly in the center of his expensive event, pushed him to the edge of blind fury. He looked from Spencer's bowed posture to my calm, confident expression, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. He refused to accept what he was seeing. He marched directly toward the resort manager who had just arrived at the scene, looking alarmed by the escalating commotion. My father reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a sleek black credit card, waving it aggressively in the manager's face. "Listen to me very carefully," my father growled, his voice echoing across the silent patio. "I am Dr. Richard Washington. I paid $250,000 to rent this venue. I demand you throw this parasite into the ocean immediately." The resort manager did not even reach for the sleek black card. Instead, he took a slow, deliberate step backward and folded his hands behind his back. His expression remained perfectly neutral, but there was a distinct coldness in his eyes as he looked at my father. "Sir," the manager said, his voice projecting clearly over the murmurs of the stunned guests, "you paid $250,000 to rent the ballroom and the immediate patio area for the evening. That makes you a temporary guest. However, the woman you are currently screaming at is Miss Naomi Washington, the Chief Executive Officer of Apex Health Partners. She purchased this entire 500-acre resort yesterday morning for $400 million in cash. She is not a trespasser, sir. She is your landlord tonight." The heavy silence that followed his words was absolute. You could have heard a single flower petal drop onto the marble floor. My father froze, his extended hand still holding the black credit card hovering uselessly in the air. The purple flush of rage on his face rapidly drained away, leaving behind a sickly pale gray. He stared at the manager, then slowly turned his disbelief toward me. The arrogant chief of surgery looked completely unmoored, his brain unable to process the astronomical number that had just been spoken. $400 million in cash. It was a figure that shattered his entire comprehension of wealth and power. "That is a lie," my father finally sputtered, lowering his hand but pointing an accusatory finger at me. "That is completely impossible. She is a high school dropout. She was homeless 11 years ago. If she has any money at all, she must be some rich man's pathetic sugar baby, or running some kind of corporate scam. You are being lied to." I took a slow step forward, my heels clicking against the stone patio. I did not raise my voice, but I made sure the cold authority in my tone reached every single person in that elite crowd. "Do you remember the night you threw me out, Dad?" I asked softly, watching him flinch at the direct address. You ripped my business plans to shreds right in front of my face. You threw my bags into a blizzard and told me I would be begging on the streets within a month because I refused to follow your arrogant medical path. I tilted my head, studying his panicked eyes. I never begged, Dad. I bought the streets. The wealthy elite guests around us began to whisper furiously among themselves. The Sterling family, Spencer's old money relatives, were visibly disgusted by the entire scene. They were generational wealth people who despised public scandals and tacky displays of arrogance. Spencer's mother leaned over to his father, shaking her head and muttering about the classless screaming match the Washingtons were causing on someone else's property. My mother, Patricia, saw her precious white in-laws pulling away and sheer panic set into her eyes. She could not let her golden child's wedding be ruined. She could not lose her grasp on the ultimate social climbing opportunity. Desperate to save face, my mother lunged forward and snatched the microphone from the wedding singer's stand. She marched to the center of the patio, her custom emerald gown glittering under the venue lights. She pointed aggressively at me, her voice trembling with a desperate need to her superiority. Money means absolutely nothing, she yelled through the speakers, her voice echoing across the ocean waves. You can buy a hotel, but you can never buy class, and you can never buy the prestige of our medical dynasty. We save lives every single day. We are the board of directors at Atlanta General Hospital. Your father and I are the pillars of Black excellence in the medical community. We have dedicated our lives to healing, while you are just a soulless corporate vulture who pushes paper around. My mother was breathing heavily now, trying to rally the crowd to her side. She pulled Chloe close to her, wrapping a protective arm around her golden child. My sister Chloe is a real success story. My mother continued practically shouting into the microphone. She just graduated from the top of her medical class, and tomorrow morning she is being officially named the new head of pediatrics at Atlanta General. She earned her status through brilliance and dedication. She heals the sick, while you do nothing but hoard money like a greedy parasite. We have a legacy of saving lives. You have nothing but empty bank accounts. You will never be equal to the doctors in this family. I listened to her desperate speech, and I could not help it. I threw my head back and laughed out loud. The sound was genuine, echoing with years of suppressed vindication. My mother looked completely thrown off balance by my laughter, tightening her grip on Chloe's arm. I stopped laughing and looked directly at Spencer, who was still standing off to the side, trembling like a frightened child. I simply snapped my fingers once. Spencer nearly tripped over his own expensive tuxedo shoes as he scrambled forward. He grabbed his leather briefcase from a nearby table, his hands shaking so violently he could barely work the golden clasps. The entire crowd watched in stunned silence as the wealthy aristocratic groom acted like a terrified subordinate. Spencer finally wrenched the briefcase open and pulled out a thick red folder. He practically sprinted over to me, presenting the folder with both hands. His head still bowed in absolute submission. "Thank you, Spencer," I said mildly, taking the red folder from his trembling hands. I turned my attention back to my mother, who was staring at the red folder as if it were a venomous snake. "You love talking about Atlanta General Hospital, Mom," I said, my voice projecting clearly, without the need for a microphone. "You love holding that board of directors position over everyone else's head like a crown. But it seems you and Dad have been too busy planning this $1 million wedding to actually read the financial news this week." I opened the red folder and pulled out the crisp legal documents bearing the heavy gold seal of my corporation. Apex Health Partners is not just a real estate firm, Mom. We are the largest healthcare investment conglomerate in the country. And as of 8 this morning, my acquisition team, led by your cowardly son-in-law, Spencer, officially finalized the complete hostile buyout of the Atlanta General Hospital network. A collective gasp rippled through the 500 guests. My father staggered backward, clutching his chest as if he had been physically struck. My mother dropped the microphone, letting it hit the marble floor with a loud, piercing screech of feedback. "That is right." I continued, stepping closer to my horrified parents. "I am not just your landlord tonight. I am the new chairman of your hospital board. I own the very building you work in. I own the operating rooms where you practice. I own the medical legacy you are so obsessed with preserving." Chloe stepped forward, her face pale and twisted with denial. "You are lying," she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You cannot possibly own the hospital. You are a fraud. You always were a failure. You are not even smart enough to pass your basic high school biology exams." I looked at my younger sister, feeling a cold wave of absolute clarity. "Oh, Chloe," I said softly, but with enough edge to cut through her delusions. "Do you really want to talk about high school biology exams right now? Do you really want to discuss academic brilliance in front of your wealthy new family?" Chloe hesitated, her eyes darting nervously toward Spencer's parents. I did not give her a chance to retreat. I turned to the crowd, making sure every prominent doctor and socialite heard my next words. My mother loves to brag about her golden child's brilliance, but what she conveniently leaves out of her perfect family narrative is how she used to sneak into the school administration office. She was on the parent-teacher board, and she used her access to switch my stellar test scores with Chloe's failing ones. My mother gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. I pressed on, my voice ringing with indisputable truth. For 3 years, my mother deliberately sabotaged my academic record, assigning my perfect grades to Chloe, just so her precious golden child could secure a spot in a prestigious pre-med program. "You did not earn your medical degree, Chloe. You stole it from me. You built your entire life on a foundation of my stolen achievements because you were never smart enough to do it on your own." The guests began to murmur loudly, pointing at my mother and Chloe in disgust. The pristine reputation of the Washington medical dynasty was crumbling into dust before their very eyes. The Sterling family looked absolutely horrified at the revelation of academic fraud. My father tried to intervene, stepping in front of my mother. "You have no proof of these insane accusations, Naomi," he yelled desperately, trying to regain control. "You are just a bitter, vindictive child making up lies because you never good enough to be a doctor." I smiled, looking down at the red folder in my hands. "I do not need to prove what happened in high school, Dad," I replied calmly, "because the crimes you two have committed recently are far more interesting, and I have absolute proof of those right here in my hands." As the new chairman of the board, my first official action was to order a comprehensive forensic audit of all senior staff. I announced opening the folder completely, and the results for the chief of surgery and the head of pediatrics were absolutely fascinating. I pulled out the first document, holding it up for the crowd to see. "Dr. Patricia Washington," I looking my mother dead in the eyes. "Effective immediately, you are stripped of your medical privileges and terminated from Atlanta General. Our auditors uncovered extensive evidence that you have been taking hundreds of thousands of dollars in illegal kickbacks from pharmaceutical representatives in exchange for pushing their expensive drugs on vulnerable pediatric patients." My mother let out a strangled cry, falling to her knees on the marble patio as the elite crowd gasped in horror. I pulled out the second document, turning my attention to my father, who was now sweating profusely. "And Dr. Richard Washington," I continued, my voice slicing through the tense air like a scalpel, "you are also terminated effective immediately. The audit proves that you have been systematically embezzling millions of dollars from the hospital's experimental cancer research grants to fund your lavish lifestyle and pay for this ridiculous oceanfront wedding. Both of your files have already been handed over to the federal authorities." The crowd erupted into chaos. Prominent doctors and board members began backing away from my parents as if they were carrying a contagious disease. Their entire elite social circle was abandoning them in real time. The medical legacy they had worshipped and used to torture me for 18 years was officially dead and buried. But instead of showing any remorse, Chloe suddenly stepped forward, her face twisted into a mask of pure, unhinged arrogance. She stomped her foot, her diamond gown shimmering aggressively in the twilight. "I do not care about your stupid hospital," Chloe screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice cracking with desperation. "You can fire them, but you cannot touch me. I do not need your money or your jobs. My parents gave me a $2.5 million dowry for this wedding. I have millions in my personal bank account right now. I am rich and I am untouchable. And you are still just a jealous, bitter spinster trying to ruin my life." Chloe stood there breathing heavily, her gown shimmering as she clung to her dignity. She turned her back to me and focused her frantic energy on Spencer and his parents. The Sterling family sat at their table looking horrified by the unfolding scene. Chloe marched over to them, her voice shaking but dripping with arrogant entitlement. She spread her arms wide, gesturing to the lavish floral arrangements. "You do not need to worry about any of this hospital nonsense," she pleaded with her new white in-laws, her eyes wide and manic. "My parents are brilliant doctors who made a few administrative mistakes, but we are still incredibly wealthy. We are still elite. My parents gifted me $2.5 million today as a wedding dowry. The money is sitting securely in my personal accounts right now. I am completely independent of whatever corporate games this jealous, bitter spinster is playing. She pointed a shaking finger back at me, her face twisted with absolute hatred. She is just trying to ruin my life because she has nothing else. She dropped out of high school and embarrassed us all. She has no husband, no family, and no class. Do not let her tricks fool you. I am the golden child of the Washington family. I have a $2.5 million safety net that makes me entirely untouchable. I can buy my own hospital if I want to. I can fund my own pediatric practice. We are the exact kind of high society family you wanted your son to marry into. My mother, Patricia, crawled up from the floor, her gown ruined by dirt. She rushed to stand beside her golden child, nodding frantically at Spencer's parents. Chloe is absolutely right, Patricia insisted, wiping a tear from her cheek and forcing a desperate aristocratic smile. This is just a temporary setback orchestrated by a vindictive sociopath. We are still the Washingtons. We still have millions in private offshore accounts. My daughter came to this marriage with a $2.5 million dowry to prove our commitment to the Sterling family legacy. We are not ruined. We are perfectly fine. My father straightened his suit jacket and stepped up beside his wife. He glared at me with pure venom before turning a reassuring smile toward the Sterlings. My wife speaks the truth, Richard declared, his booming voice echoing across the silent patio. We always prioritize our children's success. We ensured that Chloe would never have to worry about money. $2.5 million is just the beginning of the wealth we are prepared to bring into this union. Naomi is a corporate thug, but she cannot touch the private wealth we gave to our youngest daughter. Chloe smiled triumphantly, her chest heaving as she thought she had successfully salvaged her perfect wedding. She looked at me with a sickeningly sweet expression of pure victory. You see, Naomi? Chloe gloated, her voice echoing across the silent resort patio. You can buy the building, and you can fire our parents, but you cannot take away my money. I am a multimillionaire, and I am married into one of the most powerful families in the country. You are still just the miserable outcast who got thrown into the snow. You lose. I win. Chloe strutted across the marble floor, making sure the hem of her wedding dress caught the light. She wanted every single guest to focus on her wealth and ignore the fact that her parents had just been exposed as criminals. She looked at the guests, her chin raised high. My sister is just trying to cause a scene because she could never achieve what I have achieved, Chloe announced to the silent crowd. She wants to pretend she is some powerful businesswoman, but at the end of the day, she is empty inside. She has no one to share her life with while I have the perfect husband and a massive fortune that she cannot touch. I am the doctor. I am the one with the $2.5 million dowry. I am the one who gets the fairy tale ending while she goes back to her cold, empty corporate office. My parents loved me enough to ensure my financial independence, and Naomi will never experience that. She is just a sad, lonely woman trying to buy respect because she knows she will never naturally command it the way our family does. The sheer delusion dripping from her words was astounding. She honestly believed that waving a bank balance in my face would erase her parents' humiliation. She paraded her perceived superiority, like a shield convinced that her unearned wealth made her invincible against the consequences of reality. She quickly turned back to Spencer, offering him a sickly sweet fake smile, her hand reaching out to caress his lapel. We do not need to let this disruption ruin our evening, she purred with artificial affection. We have everything we need to build our dynasty. We have the elite status, the prestigious medical background, and the backing of the Washington family. My parents made sure I entered this marriage as an equal partner. $2.5 million proves that my family honors their commitments and takes care of their own. You have absolutely nothing to worry about, darling. We are the perfect match, and no bitter estranged relative is going to take that away from us. She locked eyes with me, her expression filled with malicious triumph, fully expecting me to retreat. I stood there listening to her boast about her millions, and I felt a slow, cold smile spread across my face. I did not yell. I did not scream. I simply shook my head in pure amusement. I raised my hand and signaled toward the back of the venue. A tall man in a tailored gray suit stepped out from the lobby. He walked slowly down the long white marble steps with absolute undeniable purpose, carrying a thick black leather briefcase. This was my lead attorney who had spent 6 months dismantling the Washington family secrets. Did Mommy and Daddy tell you where that money actually came from, Chloe? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. Chloe faltered, her triumphant smile slipping just a fraction. "What are you talking about?" she demanded, her eyes darting nervously between me and my advancing lawyer. "They saved it for me. They are successful doctors." I laughed, a low, hollow sound that made my father physically flinch. I turned to my attorney and held out my hand. He handed me a heavy wireless microphone and a stack of yellowed legal documents. I looked directly at Chloe, making sure Spencer and his old money parents were paying very close attention. 11 years ago, our grandmother passed away, I said, speaking clearly into the microphone, so the entire 500-person crowd could hear every syllable. She was the only person in this toxic family who saw the truth. She knew our parents hated me because I refused their quest for medical prestige. She knew they favored you, Chloe, and she knew they would eventually try to destroy my life. So, when she died, she left her entire estate directly to me. Every single penny of her $2.5 million fortune was placed into a trust fund under my name. Chloe stared at me, her face blank with confusion. My mother let out a strangled gasp and tried to lunge forward, but my security guards immediately stepped in her path, blocking her from reaching me. I held up the yellow documents for the crowd to see. "These are the original untampered copies of our grandmother's will," I announced. My attorney retrieved them from the state archives. "The money was mine, Chloe, but our parents could not stand the thought of the family scapegoat having financial independence, so they hatched an illegal plan to steal it." I turned to look at my father, who was now shaking so violently he had to grip a chair to stay upright. 11 years ago, during the exact same week, they kicked me out of the house into a freezing blizzard. My loving parents forged a series of psychiatric evaluations, I explained, my voice turning hard as steel. My father used his position as chief of surgery to falsify medical records, claiming I was severely schizophrenic and completely mentally unfit to manage my own affairs. They took those forged records to a judge and had me legally declared incompetent. They stripped away my basic human rights without me even knowing it. The wealthy guests gasped in collective horror. Doctors and lawyers in the crowd began whispering furiously, recognizing the severity of the crimes. Once they legally stole my autonomy, they appointed themselves as my financial conservators. I continued pacing slowly across the patio. They drained my entire trust fund in a matter of days. They took the $2.5 million that my grandmother left to protect me, and they laundered it through offshore accounts. They left me homeless, freezing, and starving on the streets while they stole my only lifeline. And what did they do with my stolen money, Chloe? I stopped pacing and looked right into my sister's terrified eyes. They used it to buy your way through medical school. They used it to bribe officials to cover up your failing grades. And today they packaged the remaining stolen funds and handed them to you as a wedding dowry. Chloe shook her head violently, tears of panic finally spilling down her cheeks. "No," she cried out, backing away from our parents. "No, that is a lie. My money is clean. My parents earned it." My attorney stepped forward, his voice booming with authority. "Miss Washington Sterling," he said, adjusting his glasses. "We have the bank transfer records, the forged psychiatric evaluations, and the sworn testimony of the hospital clerk who processed the fake medical files. Your parents committed grand larceny, medical fraud, and criminal conspiracy. The $2.5 million in your bank account is the exact stolen trust fund belonging to my client. The money you have been bragging about is entirely composed of stolen funds. Every single diamond on your dress, every dollar in your checking account, and every aspect of this lavish dowry was built on the complete financial ruin and medical imprisonment of your own sister. The paperwork has already been filed in federal court. Your accounts will be frozen by tomorrow morning and returned to my client with interest. You are not a wealthy elite heiress, Chloe. You are the unwitting recipient of stolen property." The Sterling family sat frozen in their chairs, their aristocratic faces pale with absolute disgust. These were people who built their entire identity on generational prestige, flawless reputations, and avoiding any hint of public scandal. They were old money white elites who viewed criminal behavior as an unforgivable disease. Spencer's mother stood up from her front row seat. She looked at my parents as if she had just stepped in something foul on the sidewalk. "This is completely repulsive, Spencers," Mother announced, her voice carrying a cold, sharp edge that commanded the entire patio. "We thought we were uniting our family with respectable medical professionals. Instead, we are surrounded by common thieves, forging medical documents to steal a trust fund from your teenage daughter, and using those stolen funds to buy a marriage into our family is the most vile scheme I have witnessed. We built our entire family legacy on honesty and integrity. We gave millions to charity while you were actively destroying your own flesh and blood just to maintain a pathetic illusion of superiority. The sheer audacity to stand here and boast about your wealth while standing on the broken life of your own child is beyond comprehension. I have never seen such a disgusting display of moral bankruptcy in my entire life. You people are monsters hidden behind expensive medical coats. She turned to her outraged husband, who was already gripping his cane, signaling their private driver to bring their car around. We do not associate with criminals, she stated firmly, gathering her shawl. We do not tolerate scandal, and we certainly do not marry into families of embezzlers who steal from their own blood. This wedding is a farce. My mother, Patricia, burst into frantic tears, throwing herself at the feet of Spencer's mother. Please do not do this, Patricia begged, her voice shrill with sheer panic. The Washingtons are a good family. We just made a few mistakes to protect our legacy. Please do not abandon us now. Chloe loves your son. Spencer's mother looked down at Patricia with unfiltered disdain and simply stepped around her, walking away without another word. My father panicked, seeing their social climbing opportunity evaporating before his eyes. He turned to Spencer, who was still standing near me, looking paralyzed. Spencer, my father commanded, trying to assert his authority. You are a man. Act like one. Defend your bride. Tell your parents that you love Chloe and that you will stand by this family. Fix this right now. Spencer raised his heavy head. He slowly looked at my furious father and then his weeping bride. His pale hands were trembling as he reached for his left hand and took off his silver wedding ring. Spencer stood frozen on the marble patio, his hands shaking violently as he gripped the silver wedding band he had just slid off his finger. The silence in the venue was absolute. 500 elite guests held their collective breath, watching a man mentally calculate the exact cost of his marriage. Chloe stared at his bare hand, her eyes wide with a manic kind of terror. She lunged forward, grabbing his arm with both of her hands, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the dark fabric of his bespoke tuxedo. Spencer, what are you doing? She pleaded, her voice cracking as panic finally broke through her arrogant facade. Put the ring back on right now. You are embarrassing me in front of everyone. We are supposed to be a united front against her. She is just trying to tear us apart because she is jealous of what we have. Please, Spencer, put it back on. Spencer did not move. He did not even look at her. His terrified gaze remained locked entirely on me. He understood the brutal reality of the corporate food chain. He knew that as the chief executive officer of Apex Health Partners, I held his entire professional existence in the palm of my hand. He knew that my silence was more dangerous than any screaming fit my parents could throw. My mother, Patricia, could not handle the public humiliation of watching her new aristocratic son-in-law pull away from her golden child. She stomped across the patio, her ruined emerald gown dragging behind her. She pointed a shaking finger at Spencer, her face contorted with desperation and rage. Spencer Sterling, you act like a man right this instant, Patricia commanded, her voice echoing harshly against the ocean waves. You are a part of the Washington family now, and we expect absolute loyalty. Defend your bride. Defend our legacy. You come from a powerful family of generational wealth, and you will not let this ungrateful corporate vulture intimidate you. Tell your parents that you love my daughter and that you will stand by us. Put that ring back on your finger and fix this mess immediately. My father Richard chimed in, stepping up beside his wife to present a united front. He puffed out his chest, trying to reclaim his shattered authority. Listen to your mother-in-law, Spencer, my father demanded. We brought you into our elite circle. We gave you our youngest daughter, along with a $2.5 million dowry. We have fulfilled our obligations to the Sterling family. And now it is your turn to fulfill yours. Shut this nonsense down. Tell Naomi to leave before I have my lawyers destroy her for defamation. Chloe nodded frantically, tears streaming down her face, ruining her flawless bridal makeup. Yes, Spencer. Tell her. Chloe begged, pulling desperately at his jacket. Tell her that our love is stronger than her money. Tell her that you do not care about her stupid hospital or her corporate titles because we have our own wealth. We do not need her. We only need each other. Please, darling, just put the ring back on and we can walk away from this cycle forever. Spencer stood there suffocating under the weight of their demands. His chest heaved as he struggled to pull air into his lungs. The Sterling family, his parents and relatives, watched him from their tables, their faces pale with disgust and silent judgment. They were waiting to see if he would align himself with a family of exposed thieves or if he would cut his losses and run. I did not say a single word. I did not need to. I simply stood there in my custom dress, holding my glass of sparkling water, and raised one single eyebrow. The gesture was tiny, almost imperceptible to anyone not paying close attention. But to Spencer, it was louder than a gunshot. He knew exactly what that raised eyebrow meant. It meant his time was up. It meant he had to make a choice right now between his precious golden bride and his entire future on Wall Street. The ocean breeze whipped across the patio, catching the heavy diamond-encrusted fabric of Chloe's wedding dress, making it sparkle mockingly in the fading light. The contrast between her fairy tale attire and her desperate, pathetic begging was sharp and undeniable. Guests began to whisper among themselves, the low hum of gossip spreading like wildfire through the crowd of prominent surgeons and wealthy socialites. They were watching the complete destruction of the Washington family dynasty happening in real time. Patricia heard the whispers and her panic intensified. She grabbed Spencer's other arm, digging her fingers in. "Do you hear me, Spencer?" Patricia hissed, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper meant only for him. "If you walk away from my daughter now, you will be making an enemy of the most powerful medical family in Atlanta. We will ruin your reputation in this city. We will tell everyone that the Sterlings are cowards who abandon their commitments at the first sign of trouble." Richard leaned in close, his face inches from Spencer's. "You owe us," Richard growled. "You signed a marriage certificate today. You made a vow in front of 500 people. You do not get to just take off that ring because my estranged daughter threw a tantrum about some ancient family history. Be a man and put the ring back on." Chloe continued to weep, her dark eyes wide and pleading. "I love you, Spencer," she sobbed. "I am your wife. You promised to protect me. You promised we would build a beautiful life together. She is just trying to ruin it because she has nothing. She is empty and bitter, and she wants me to be as miserable as she is. Please do not let her win." Spencer looked down at the silver wedding band resting in his trembling palm. He looked at Chloe's tear-stained face, the woman he had promised to love and cherish just hours earlier. Then he looked back at me, the woman who controlled his paycheck, his bonuses, his stock options, and his entire professional reputation. The realization of his absolute powerlessness washed over him. He finally found his voice, and when he spoke, it was not filled with love or loyalty. It was filled with pure, unadulterated survival instinct. He violently ripped his arm away from Patricia and Chloe, shoving them backward with a force that made my mother stumble in her expensive heels. Chloe gasped, catching her balance against a table, her eyes wide with shock. "Defend you?" Spencer yelled, his voice cracking with panic and rage. "Defend this family? Are you completely insane?" He took a step back, putting physical distance between himself and the Washingtons, as if their criminal behavior was contagious. "My boss makes one single phone call, and I am blacklisted from Wall Street forever. My entire career would be over by tomorrow morning. I would never work in finance again. I would lose everything I have ever worked for just to protect a family of common thieves." Spencer turned his furious gaze entirely onto Chloe, pointing a shaking finger at her face. "You lied to me," he screamed, the sound echoing off the marble pillars of the resort. "You looked me dead in the eyes and lied to my face for 2 entire years. You told me your sister was a drug addict serving a 10-year sentence in a federal prison. You told me she was a violent sociopath who destroyed your childhood and broke your parents' hearts." A collective gasp rose from the crowd. I simply smiled, taking another slow sip of my water. So, that was the narrative they had constructed to explain my absence. A drug addict in prison. It was a brilliant lie, perfectly designed to elicit sympathy for the golden child, while ensuring no one in their elite circle would ever try to contact me. "You told me she stole money from your parents and ran away to join a cartel," Spencer continued, his face red with fury. "You told my parents that your family had to cut ties with her for your own safety. And all this time, she was actually out there building a multi-billion-dollar healthcare empire, while you and your parents were busy forging medical documents to steal her inheritance. You used stolen money to buy your way into my family." Chloe shook her head frantically, her hands reaching out toward him. "No, Spencer. Please, you do not understand. I was trying to protect you from the shame. I did not want your family to judge us for having a dropout in the family. The money was given to me by my parents. I did not know it was stolen. I swear I did not know. Do not play the victim with me." Spencer spat, taking another step back toward his own family. You are a fraud, Chloe. Your entire life is a fraud. Your medical degree was bought with stolen money. Your perfect reputation is a lie built on your sister's stolen achievements. And your $2.5 million dowry is grand larceny. My family does not associate with criminals. My parents were right. You people are absolutely repulsive. Spencer raised his hand, holding the silver wedding band between his thumb and forefinger. Chloe let out a guttural scream of pure desperation. No, Spencer, do not do it. Please. I am begging you. I will give her the money back. We can fix this. Just do not leave me. Spencer did not hesitate for another second. He violently threw the silver wedding ring directly at Chloe's chest. The heavy metal band bounced off the diamonds on her wedding dress and clattered onto the marble floor, rolling away and disappearing under a table. We are done, Spencer announced, his voice cold and final. I am calling my lawyers right now to file for an immediate annulment on the grounds of criminal fraud. Do not ever contact me again. Spencer turned his back on his weeping bride and marched over to his parents. The Sterling family immediately stood up, forming a protective wall around their son. They turned their backs on the Washingtons, refusing to even look at them as they began to gather their things to leave the venue. Spencer had completely abandoned his bride at the altar, choosing his corporate career and his old money reputation over a marriage built on a foundation of stolen trust funds and lies. Chloe stood frozen in the center of the patio, watching her aristocratic husband walk away from her forever. The reality of her complete destruction finally settled into her mind. She had lost her prestigious marriage. She had lost her stolen $2.5 million dowry. Her parents had lost their jobs, and their medical licenses were certainly next. The perfect golden child narrative she had cultivated for 25 years had been obliterated in less than 20 minutes. She had absolutely nothing left. Chloe slowly turned her head to look at me. Her perfectly styled hair was coming undone, falling in messy strands across her tear-streaked face. Her dark eyes were wide and manic, entirely devoid of reason or sanity. The facade of the elegant, successful doctor completely vanished, leaving behind nothing but a feral, cornered animal. This is all your fault, Chloe whispered, her voice trembling with an unhinged, psychotic rage. You took him from me. You took my money. You took my wedding. You ruined my entire life. You ruined your own life, Chloe, I replied calmly. I just provided the audience. Chloe let out a blood-curdling scream of pure, blinding rage. She completely lost her mind as her perfect life crumbled around her. She gathered the heavy diamond-encrusted fabric of her wedding dress in her hands and lunged forward, charging directly at me with her acrylic nails bared like claws. She intended to physically attack me, to tear my face apart in front of 500 high society guests. You ruined everything, she shrieked, hurtling across the marble floor. I am going to kill you. I did not even flinch. I did not take a single step backward. Before Chloe could even get within 5 feet of me, my private security team moved with lightning speed and lethal precision. 2 massive men in dark suits stepped seamlessly in front of me, intercepting my frantic sister mid-lunge. One guard grabbed her flailing arms, while the other swept her legs out from under her. Chloe hit the marble patio hard, the heavy layers of her wedding dress tangling awkwardly around her legs. She thrashed and kicked, screaming profanities at the top of her lungs, but my security guards effortlessly pinned her to the ground. They held her down with cold, professional efficiency, ignoring her frantic sobbing and her desperate attempts to scratch their faces. My mother screamed in horror, watching her golden child being wrestled to the ground like a common street criminal. My father tried to intervene, but a third security guard stepped in front of him, pressing a firm hand against his chest to keep him back. The majestic waterfront wedding had officially devolved into a chaotic, humiliating crime scene. I stood looking down at my sister as she writhed on the cold marble floor, her beautiful gown torn and dirty, her perfect makeup smeared into muddy streaks across her cheeks. She was sobbing hysterically, screaming my name and cursing the day I was born. I simply took another slow sip of my sparkling water, savoring the absolute peace that comes with total victory. Then, the distinct, piercing sound of sirens echoed in the distance. The wailing grew louder, piercing through the chaotic murmurs of the fleeing wedding guests. The distant sound was a harsh reminder that actions have consequences, even for the untouchable elite. I watched the flashing lights draw closer, painting the extravagant white floral arrangements in jarring shades of blue and red. The illusion of the Washington medical dynasty was finally over, replaced by the cold, hard reality of the law. Chloe continued to thrash against the marble floor, her shrieks growing more ragged and desperate with every passing second, while my parents stood paralyzed, watching their carefully constructed empire burn to ash. The wailing of the sirens grew deafeningly loud, drowning out the frantic murmurs of the fleeing wedding guests. The flashing red and blue lights sliced through the elegant twilight, casting harsh shadows across the pristine marble patio. A fleet of black armored SUVs and marked police cruisers smashed through the front gates of the resort. They tore up the manicured lawns and skidded to a halt just inches away from the luxurious champagne tower. The doors flew open, and dozens of federal agents poured out. They were wearing dark tactical gear with the letters FBI emblazoned across their tactical vests in bold yellow print. The elite high society crowd gasped and scrambled backward, knocking over crystal centerpieces and expensive floral arrangements in their desperate rush to get out of the way. These were old money aristocrats and powerful hospital board members who spent their entire lives avoiding scandal. Now they were trapped in the middle of a federal raid. The lead agent, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a stern expression, marched directly onto the patio. He was flanked by 6 heavily armed officers who immediately secured the perimeter, locking down all the exits so no one could escape. The agent ignored the panicked wealthy guests and locked his eyes straight on my parents. My father, Richard Washington, took a shaky step backward, his arrogant posture completely crumbling under the weight of federal authority. He tried to adjust his bespoke tuxedo jacket, attempting to muster one final shred of his chief of surgery intimidation tactics, but his hands were trembling too violently to even grip his own lapels. My mother, Patricia, stood frozen beside him, her mouth opening and closing like a suffocated fish. The emerald green fabric of her custom gown was already ruined from crawling on the floor earlier, but she seemed entirely unaware of her disheveled appearance. Her wide, terrified eyes darted between the armed federal agents and my calm, unwavering face. She finally realized that this was not just a corporate takeover or a family dispute. This was the absolute end of her freedom. Richard and Patricia Washington, the lead agent, announced, his deep voice echoing across the silent tariff, larceny, wire fraud, medical embezzlement, and criminal conspiracy. My father let out a strangled gasp, clutching his chest as if the agent had physically struck him. "This is a mistake," my father stammered, his booming, authoritative voice replaced by a pathetic, high-pitched whine. "I am a respected doctor. I am the chief of surgery at Atlanta General. You cannot just barge into my daughter's $1 million wedding and accuse me of crimes without evidence. We are pillars of the Black community. You are ruining our reputation." The lead agent did not even blink at my father's desperate attempt to leverage his social status. He simply reached into his tactical vest and pulled out a thick stack of warrants bearing the heavy seal of a federal judge. "We have all the evidence we need, Dr. Washington," the agent replied coldly. "We have offshore bank records, forged psychiatric evaluations, and a mountain of internal hospital audits proving you systematically stole millions of dollars from cancer research grants and your own daughter's trust fund." My father looked wildly around the patio, his eyes finally landing on me. His chest heaved as he pointed a shaking finger in my direction. "She set us up." My father screamed, his face turning a sickly shade of purple. "She is a vindictive sociopath. She hacked our accounts and planted those documents to frame us because she was jealous of her sister. You have to arrest her. She is the real criminal here." I slowly walked down the marble steps, the soft clicking of my heels sounding like a ticking clock counting down the final seconds of their luxurious lives. I stopped just a few feet away from my trembling parents. My private security team flanked me, creating an impenetrable wall of protection between me and their desperate flailing. "I did not frame you, Dad," I said, my voice perfectly smooth and devoid of any sympathy. "I simply handed the Federal Bureau of Investigation the exact same folders I just read to your guests. I gave them full access to the Apex Health Partners acquisition audits 3 weeks ago. The Financial Crimes Unit has been tracking your offshore laundering accounts every single day while you were busy picking out wedding cake flavors and designer dresses. I just asked them to politely wait until the vows were exchanged so your precious golden child could have her perfect, unforgettable evening." The reality of the situation crashed down upon my parents with crushing, undeniable force. They were not just losing their hospital board seats or their stolen wealth. They were going to federal prison. The realization shattered the last remaining pieces of their arrogant facades. The pristine, untouchable doctors who had spent 18 years treating me like a biological defect were suddenly reduced to terrified, cornered animals. My mother, Patricia, was the first to completely break. The woman who had built her entire identity on ruthless social climbing and projecting absolute superiority suddenly collapsed onto her knees. The heavy diamonds around her neck clattered against the marble floor as she threw herself forward, crawling toward my feet. She reached out with shaking hands, trying to grab the hem of my custom dress, but my security guard stepped forward and blocked her path. "Naomi, please," my mother sobbed, her voice cracking with raw, unfiltered panic. Her perfectly styled updo had completely unraveled, leaving messy strands of hair clinging to her tear-soaked face. "Please do not do this to us. We are your parents. We gave you life. We raised you in a beautiful home. You cannot send your own flesh and blood to a federal prison." My father dropped to his knees right beside her, his expensive tuxedo pants soaking up the spilled champagne on the patio floor. He clasped his hands together in a gesture of pathetic begging, shedding tears of pure terror. "We made mistakes, Naomi." My father wept, his voice echoing across the silent audience of horrified guests. "We were stressed. We wanted Chloe to succeed so badly that we lost our way. But we are still a family. We are blood. You have to call off the agents. You have the power to stop this. Tell them it was a corporate misunderstanding. Please, Naomi. We will do whatever you want. We will give you back every single penny." The high society crowd watched in absolute disgust as the once mighty Washingtons groveled and wept on the dirty marble floor. The Sterling family, Spencer's aristocratic parents, looked physically revolted by the pathetic display of begging. They had already signaled their private drivers and were actively marching out of the venue, leaving the Washingtons behind like discarded trash. I stood there looking down at the two people who had made my childhood a living nightmare. I watched them cry and plead, using the very concept of family that they had weaponized against me for my entire life. They expected me to fold. They expected the abused scapegoat daughter to suddenly crave their approval and save them from the consequences of their own monstrous actions. I took a slow, deliberate step forward. I signaled my security guards to step back just enough to let me look directly into my mother's weeping eyes. I slowly lowered myself, gracefully bending my knees until my face was level with hers. The federal agents stood perfectly still, waiting for me to finish. My mother looked at me with wild, desperate hope, believing that her tears had finally reached me. "Oh, thank you, Naomi," my mother gasped, trying to reach for my hand again. "I knew you would not destroy your own mother. I knew you still loved us." I looked into her eyes and let a cold, dead smile spread across my face. I leaned in close, making sure my voice carried over the ocean breeze, so everyone, including my pinned sister Chloe, could hear exactly what I had to say. "Do you remember the night you threw me out into the blizzard, Mom?" I asked softly, keeping my tone completely flat. "I was 18 years old. I was freezing, and I begged you to let me stay just one more night, so I would not freeze to death on the streets. I told you that we were blood, and that you could not do that to your own daughter." My mother swallowed hard, her eyes darting nervously. "Naomi, that was a long time ago," she whispered. "We were angry." I did not let her finish. I kept my eyes locked onto hers, forcing her to relive the exact moment she had tried to end my life. "You looked me dead in the eyes that night, Mom," I continued, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "And you told me that blood is just a biological accident. You told me that trash belongs in the dumpster." My mother recoiled as if I had physically slapped her. The color completely drained from her face, leaving her looking like a terrified ghost. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The devastating realization that her own cruel words had sealed her fate finally paralyzed her completely. I slowly stood back up, smoothing the fabric of my dress. I looked down at them one last time, feeling nothing but absolute liberating emptiness. "You were right, Mom," I said coldly. "Blood is just a biological accident, and it is time for the trash to be taken out." I turned my back on them and nodded to the lead federal agent. He immediately signaled his officers. The agent swarmed forward, grabbing my parents by their arms and violently hauling them up from the marble floor. The sharp metallic click of handcuffs echoed loudly across the patio as cold steel locked around my parents' wrists. "No!" my mother screamed, kicking and thrashing as two agents dragged her backward. "You cannot do this. I am a respected doctor. I am Patricia Washington. Get your hands off me." My father fought against his restraints, weeping uncontrollably as the agents pushed him toward the exit. "Naomi, please," my father wailed, his voice cracking into a pathetic sob. "We are sorry. We are so sorry. Do not let them take us away." The federal agents ignored their screaming frog, marching them brutally across the elegant patio. The paparazzi, who had been tipped off by my PR team, were already waiting outside the resort gates. The moment my handcuffed parents were dragged out of the venue, the rolling cameras and blinding camera flashes illuminated their absolute destruction. The prominent chief of surgery and the elite head of pediatrics were shoved into the back of an armored police cruiser, their faces plastered across every local and national news network before the engine even started. The remaining guests shoved past each other in a frantic stampede toward the valet parking, trying to escape the humiliating crime scene. The string quartet had long since packed up their expensive instruments and fled, leaving only the harsh sounds of snapping metal frames as the resort workers tore down the massive white tents. The beautiful oceanfront paradise I had purchased was systematically being scrubbed clean of my toxic family's presence. Workers casually stepped over the discarded silver wedding band that Spencer had thrown at Chloe earlier, kicking it into the dirt without a second thought. Chloe was still pinned to the marble floor by my security guards, her custom diamond gown now completely ruined and stained with spilled wine and dirt. She watched her parents get dragged away in handcuffs, her eyes wide with unhinged disbelief. Her aristocratic groom had abandoned her. Her stolen $2.5 million dowry was frozen. Her parents were on their way to federal prison. Her perfect fairy tale wedding was literally being dismantled piece by piece around her head. My security guards finally released her, stepping back to let her sit up in the wreckage of her own arrogance. Chloe scrambled to her knees, pushing her messy, tangled hair out of her tear-streaked face. The elegant golden child doctor was gone, leaving behind a frantic, cornered animal. She watched the workers ripping the silk drapes from the chairs, her breath coming in ragged, panicked gasps. She tried to stand up, but her heavy, ruined dress weighed her down, causing her to stumble and fall back onto the hard stone. She crawled toward a nearby table, desperately grabbing a half-empty bottle of expensive champagne and clutching it to her chest like a weapon. The diamonds on her bodice were completely smeared with mud, and her perfectly manicured nails were chipped and bleeding from when she had tried to attack me. She looked around at the empty patio, realizing that every single person she had invited to witness her grand triumph had abandoned her. Her elite friends from medical school had run away without even looking back. The wealthy socialites she had spent years kissing up to had looked at her with pure disgust before leaving. She was entirely alone, surrounded by the garbage of her destroyed fairy tale. But instead of showing remorse or begging for forgiveness, like our parents did, Chloe chose the path of total delusion. She refused to let the golden child persona die. She hauled herself up using the edge of a table, her body trembling with a violent, manic energy. She wiped the mixture of tears and dirt from her face, smearing her expensive makeup into a terrifying, clownish mask. She locked her furious eyes onto my calm, composed figure and gritted her teeth so hard I could hear them grinding from several feet away. "You are just a jealous monster," Chloe hissed, staggering toward me before my guard stepped forward again, causing her to halt. "You have always been jealous of my beauty and my brains. You bought this resort, and you paid off those federal agents just to sabotage the greatest day of my life because you know you will never be as good as me. You think locking up mom and dad changes anything? It changes nothing. I am still Dr. Chloe Washington. I still have the respect of the medical community. People love me. They hate you." I watched her spiral into complete denial, feeling a deep, satisfying sense of closure. Her desperate clinging to a medical license she had stolen through fraud was the ultimate proof of her pathetic existence. She truly believed that a piece of paper would protect her from the devastating avalanche of legal and social destruction that was about to bury her alive. "You will pay for this, Naomi," Chloe screamed, her voice echoing into the dark night sky as the last police cruiser faded into the distance. "I will drag your name through the mud. I still have my medical license. I will ruin you in the press. I am the victim. I am the victim." 2 weeks passed since the flashing lights of the federal vehicles disappeared into the Malibu night, carrying my parents away in handcuffs. The fallout was immediate and devastating for the Washington family legacy. Richard and Patricia were denied bail, sitting in a federal facility awaiting trial for their massive embezzlement and fraud schemes. They were deemed a flight risk because of their offshore accounts. Chloe was left completely alone with nothing but her smartphone and her desperate need for attention. Her aristocratic husband had annulled their marriage. Her stolen dowry was frozen, and her prestigious medical reputation was hanging by a single fragile thread. Instead of reflecting on the horrific crimes her family had committed, Chloe decided to double down on her delusions. She fully embraced the role of the ultimate victim. She reached out to one of the most popular true crime and gossip podcasts in the country, a massive viral show hosted by an internet personality known for stirring up controversy and amplifying drama. Chloe knew exactly what she was doing when she booked that interview. She walked into the brightly lit recording studio wearing a simple, modest beige dress that aggressively contrasted with the diamond-encrusted gowns she usually flaunted. She wore minimal makeup, letting the dark circles under her eyes show to project the image of a broken, traumatized woman. The moment the cameras started rolling and the microphones went live, Chloe unleashed a masterful performance of fake tears and trembling hands. She spun a massive, intricate web of lies for the millions of viewers tuning in. She looked directly into the camera lens and told the world that I was a ruthless, vindictive sociopath. She claimed that I had never forgiven my parents for pushing me to be successful, and that I harbored a deep, psychotic grudge. Chloe sobbed into a tissue, telling the host that I had used my billions of dollars to hire elite cybercriminals. She stated that I had deliberately hacked into the Atlanta General Hospital database to plant fake evidence of embezzlement and kickbacks just to frame our innocent parents. She told the millions of listeners that my parents were saints who had dedicated their entire lives to healing sick children in the community. She claimed that I had bribed the federal agents and the local police department using my massive corporate wealth to orchestrate a humiliating public arrest at her wedding. But Chloe did not stop there. She knew exactly how to weaponize the current social climate to her advantage. She looked at the host with wide, tear-filled eyes and claimed that I was a traitor to our race. She painted a picture of a successful, thriving black medical dynasty that was maliciously destroyed by a bitter, estranged daughter. She told the audience that I had ruined an innocent black family just to appease my white corporate overlords on Wall Street. She claimed I was acting as a puppet for wealthy white investors who wanted to steal black-owned assets. She even managed to spin Spencer abandoning her at the altar into a tragic tale of corporate blackmail. Chloe wept as she described how much Spencer loved her, claiming that I had threatened to destroy his entire career and blacklist him from the financial sector if he did not humiliate her publicly. She painted him as a helpless victim of my ruthless corporate tyranny, forced to break his own heart just to survive my wrath. It was a brilliant, manipulative performance, and the internet swallowed every single word of her fabricated victim narrative without a second thought or hesitation. Within hours, the podcast episode went completely viral, spreading across every social media platform like wildfire. Short clips of Chloe crying and begging for justice for her incarcerated parents flooded every timeline and newsfeed. The court of public opinion is notoriously fickle, and they immediately turned their collective rage toward me. The public loves a dramatic fall from grace, and Chloe had served them the perfect corporate villain on a silver platter. People who knew nothing about the reality of my childhood or the stolen trust fund began posting angry videos condemning my actions and demanding my arrest. The backlash was swift and severe. By the next morning, a crowd of angry protesters had gathered on the sidewalks outside the towering glass headquarters of Apex Health Partners in downtown Atlanta. They marched back and forth carrying large cardboard signs calling me a corporate vulture, a traitor to my community, and a ruthless tyrant. The local news stations parked their vans across the street filming the growing unrest. The negative attention began to impact the company immediately. The board of directors started flooding my private executive line with frantic phone calls sweating over the sudden and steep drop in our stock prices. The wealthy investors who had previously praised my aggressive acquisition of the hospital network were now terrified of the terrible public relations nightmare Chloe had sparked. The corporate world despises unpredictability, and my sister's viral podcast tour was creating massive instability across the entire healthcare market. Right in the middle of this chaos, my office doors opened and Spencer walked in. The former golden groom looked like a shadow of his former aristocratic self. He was pale, sweating, and he looked like he had not slept a single hour since he ran away from the wedding reception 2 weeks ago. Spencer was now working directly under me as my director of acquisitions, and he was absolutely terrified of losing his lucrative position. He approached my massive mahogany desk, clutching a stack of printed financial reports and public relations strategies. His hands were trembling just as they had on the marble patio in Malibu. "Naomi, we have a massive problem," Spencer stammered, his voice tight with anxiety, as he glanced nervously at the window where the sounds of the protests could be heard faintly from the streets below. The investors are panicking, and the board members are demanding an immediate response. Spencer placed the documents on my desk, sliding them toward me with hesitant fingers. Chloe is destroying our public image, he continued, his breathing shallow and rapid. Her narrative about you being a corporate puppet for white investors is gaining serious traction. People are organizing boycotts of our facilities. The stock is dipping lower every hour. You have to issue a formal public relations statement right now. We need to draft an apology, or at least a strong denial of her accusations, to calm the markets before this spirals completely out of our control and ruins the upcoming quarterly earnings. I sat back in my high-backed leather executive chair, steepling my fingers together as I watched Spencer completely unravel under the pressure. I looked past him through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows that offered a panoramic view of the sprawling Atlanta skyline. The city looked peaceful from this height, completely detached from the chaotic noise of the internet and the angry crowds below. I was perfectly calm. My heart rate was steady, and my mind was entirely clear. I did not feel an ounce of panic or fear regarding my sister's desperate, pathetic attempts to ruin my name. I slowly turned my attention back to the trembling man standing in front of my desk. I reached out and gently pushed the stack of emergency public relations strategies back toward him. "No, Spencer," I said, my voice smooth and utterly devoid of concern. "We are not issuing a public statement, and we are certainly not issuing an apology. Putting out a carefully crafted corporate denial right now would only make me look weak and defensive. It would validate her lies and give her exactly what she wants, which is an acknowledgement that her little performance actually hurt me. But, Naomi, the stock prices." Spencer protested weakly, his eyes widening in pure disbelief at my absolute lack of urgency. "The board is going to demand action. They will not just sit back and watch millions of dollars vanish because of a viral podcast episode. We have to do something to stop her from talking." I smiled a cold, calculated expression that made Spencer instantly close his mouth and step back. "You do not understand how people like my sister operates, Spencer," I explained, leaning forwardly and resting my arms on the cool surface of my desk. "Chloe thrives on attention and sympathy, but she lacks the basic intelligence to actually back up her lies when she is put under real pressure. She is running entirely on desperation and narcissism," I continued. "If we interrupt her now, she becomes a martyr. The best way to destroy a liar is to let her keep talking. You give her the spotlight, and you give her enough rope to hang herself. She is so drunk on the viral fame and the sudden outpouring of public sympathy that she thinks she is invincible. She thinks the internet will protect her from the absolute legal and financial destruction that is coming for her. She is getting sloppy, and that is exactly what I have been waiting for." Spencer swallowed hard, looking confused and terrified. "So, we just do nothing?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "We just let her go on the air and paint you as a sociopathic monster, while the company loses millions in market value. We are not doing nothing, Spencer," I replied softly, tapping my manicured nail against the polished wood of my desk. I pulled out my tablet and woke up the screen. I swiped over to a live streaming application and turned the volume up just enough for the audio to fill the quiet executive office. The familiar voice of the podcast host echoed through the room, followed by the dramatic sniffling of my sister. Chloe had managed to secure a live follow-up interview on the exact same podcast to capitalize on the viral momentum of her first appearance. She was currently sitting in the studio broadcasting live to millions of listeners, basking in and glowing validation of the host who was treating her like a tragic hero. The host was asking her gentle, sympathetic questions about how she was managing to survive after losing her parents and her husband in the same night. Chloe was eating it up, playing the brave surviving daughter who just wanted to heal her broken Black family. I watched the live viewer count ticking upward rapidly on the screen. 3 million people were currently tuned in, listening to Chloe weave her pathetic tapestry of falsehoods. I looked up at Spencer, who was staring at the tablet with wide, horrified eyes. "She is on the air right now," Spencer muttered, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. "She is talking about you again. She is telling them that you threatened to have me killed if I did not leave her at the altar. Naomi, this is insanity. She is completely unhinged. We have to stop this broadcast immediately." I locked the tablet screen and stood up from my chair, smoothing the fabric of my tailored designer suit. I walked around the massive desk and stopped right in front of my trembling director of acquisitions. I handed him my personal mobile phone, which was already unlocked and ready. I want you to contact the producers of this podcast right now, Spencer. I commanded my tone, leaving no room for hesitation or argument. Tell them that you are calling on behalf of Naomi Washington, the Chief Executive Officer of Apex Health Partners. Tell them that the corporate villain they have been discussing for the past hour is officially ready to break her silence and respond to the allegations. Spencer took the phone, his hands shaking so badly he almost dropped the expensive device onto the hardwood floor. "You want to call in?" he asked, his voice cracking with pure disbelief. "You want to go on a live, unscripted broadcast with her while she is actively destroying your reputation in front of 3 million listeners?" I smiled, looking out the window at the protesters marching blindly below my towering corporate empire. "I am going to call into the show live while she is sitting right there in the studio," I said softly, feeling the thrill of absolute power coursing through my veins. "I am going to let her tell her little story to the world, and then I am going to tear her perfect medical reputation to shreds in front of the largest audience she has ever had. Make the call, Spencer. It is time to end the golden child." Spencer swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly against the collar of his expensive dress shirt. He lifted my phone to his ear with trembling fingers and dialed the emergency production number for the podcast studio. The room was completely silent except for the faint sound of the dial tone echoing from the device. My eyes remained fixed on the tablet screen resting on my mahogany desk, where Chloe was currently wiping away a fresh batch of fake tears. She was leaning into the microphone, playing the role of the devastated, terrified sister to absolute perfection. Then the producer answered Spencer's call. Spencer cleared his throat, trying to project a corporate authority he clearly did not feel. He informed the producer that Naomi Washington, the Chief Executive Officer of Apex Health Partners, was on the line and demanded to speak directly to the host on the live broadcast. The producers must have scrambled in the control room because less than 30 seconds later, the host held up a hand and interrupted Chloe mid-sob. The host looked directly into the camera, his eyes wide with the thrill of securing an unexpected viral moment. He announced to the millions of listeners that the corporate villain they had been discussing all evening, the ruthless billionaire sister, had just called into the studio. The live chat on the side of the screen began scrolling so fast it was just a blur of angry text. Chloe froze completely. Her fake tears stopped instantly, and genuine panic flashed across her carefully made-up face. She looked wildly toward the production booth as if she wanted to rip the phone cords out of the wall. "Hello, Naomi," the host said, his voice dripping with eager anticipation. "You are live on the air with millions of people listening. Your sister Chloe has been telling us a very disturbing story about your actions at her wedding. Do you have a response to her allegations?" I leaned forward in my executive chair and pulled the phone away from Spencer, placing it on speaker mode right in front of me. I let the silence stretch for a long, uncomfortable moment. I knew the golden rule of power dynamics. The person who rushes to speak is the person who is afraid. I was not afraid. I was the predator, and I was currently watching my prey squirm in a trap of her own making. "Hello, Chloe," I said softly, my voice smooth and perfectly flat, echoing through the studio speakers on the live feed. Chloe immediately shifted back into her victim persona. Her voice began to tremble violently, and she shrank back into her chair as if my voice alone could physically strike her. "Oh my God," she sobbed, clutching her chest. "How did you find this number? Please, Naomi, leave me alone. You have already taken my parents away from me. You have already ruined my life. Please do not hurt me anymore. I am begging you to stop this campaign of terror against our family." She was laying it on thick, hoping the audience would hear the raw terror in her voice and instantly rally to her defense. She expected me to yell. She expected me to aggressively defend myself and call her a liar, which would only make me sound exactly like the unhinged sociopath she claimed I was. But I did not argue with her. I did not raise my voice or address her pathetic performance at all. "You have been telling these millions of listeners a very compelling story tonight, Chloe," I said, ignoring her fake crying entirely. "You told them that our parents were innocent pillars of the Black medical community. You told them that I hacked a hospital database to frame them for embezzlement just to appease my wealthy corporate investors. And you told them that the $2.5 million dowry you received was clean-earned money." Chloe sniffled, leaning closer to her microphone. "It was clean money," she cried, her voice cracking with manufactured grief. My parents worked their entire lives saving every penny to give me a beautiful wedding and a stable future. You stole it because you were jealous that I became a doctor while you dropped out of school. You could not stand seeing me succeed where you failed. I smiled, looking out the window at the Atlanta skyline. It is fascinating that you brought up the timeline of my departure from the family. I replied, my tone completely analytical. You see, 11 years ago, when our parents threw me out into a freezing blizzard with absolutely nothing, I decided to start keeping very careful records. I knew that one day the truth would be necessary. So rather than arguing with you on a public broadcast, I am simply going to let you and our parents speak for yourselves. I tapped the screen of my personal laptop, pulling up a pristine audio file that my private investigators had recovered during the forensic audit of my father's digital archives. I pressed play and held my phone close to the laptop speakers. The audio quality was crystal clear, preserved perfectly in the cloud for over a decade. The sound of my father Richard laughing echoed through the podcast studio. His deep booming voice was unmistakable. The audio captured him talking to my mother Patricia in the study of our old mansion. It was too easy. My father's voice bragged on the recording. The judge barely even looked at the psychiatric evaluations. As soon as he saw my signature as the chief of surgery, he signed the conservatorship papers without a second thought. Naomi is legally incompetent as of this morning. My mother's voice chimed in, dripping with malicious satisfaction. Thank goodness, she said, on the leaving $2.5 million to that useless high school dropout was the most ridiculous thing your mother ever did. Naomi would have just wasted it on her pathetic business ideas. Now we can funnel the entire trust fund through the offshore shell accounts and use it to cover Chloe's private tutors and the new clinic. Then a third voice entered the recording. It was a younger pitch, but unmistakably Chloe's whiny, entitled tone. Make sure you lock her out of all the banking portals before she figures it out, Chloe said on the recording, laughing coldly. I need at least $100,000 of that money for my new Porsche when I get into pre-med. She is probably freezing on the street right now. Who cares about her? She is just a defect anyway. The audio file clicked off, and the podcast studio plunged into a deafening dead silence. The host sat at his desk, his mouth hanging open, his eyes darting frantically between the camera and Chloe. The live chat on the screen had completely stopped moving as 3 million people collectively processed the sheer, undeniable evil they had just heard. Chloe was paralyzed. Her face had drained of all color, leaving her looking like a wax mannequin. The tears had completely vanished from her eyes, replaced by the stark, wide-eyed terror of a cornered animal realizing there was no escape. That was an AI deepfake. Chloe suddenly shrieked, her voice pitching upward in pure panic. She waved her hands frantically at the host. She used her billions to hire some tech company to clone our voices. She generated that audio to frame us. Do not believe her. It is fake. It is all fake. I let out a soft, cold laugh that rippled through the studio feed. It is not an AI deepfake, Chloe, I stated calmly. That audio file has a digital forensic watermark dating back exactly 11 years. Furthermore, that exact recording was authenticated by the Federal Bureau of Investigation 2 weeks ago and entered into the federal court record as Exhibit A in the grand larceny and fraud case currently pending against our parents. You cannot deepfake a federal indictment, Chloe. You knew the money was stolen from me the moment they took it. You built your entire luxury life and your perfect dowry on the total financial imprisonment of your own sister. The podcast host shifted uncomfortably in his seat, realizing that his viral true crime episode had just turned into a live broadcast of a federal crime confession. He looked at Chloe with growing suspicion, the sympathy completely evaporating from his demeanor. Chloe, Miss Washington? The host asked, his voice suddenly stern and accusatory. Did you know about the forged psychiatric evaluations? Did you know your parents stole your sister's trust fund to buy your cars and pay for your schooling? No, Chloe wailed, burying her face in her hands, trying desperately to summon the tears back. She is twisting things. She is lying. I am a doctor. I heal sick children. I am a good person with a flawless medical record. You have to believe me over this corporate monster. I had been waiting for her to use her medical license as a shield. It was the final remaining pillar of her identity, the last scrap of superiority she thought she held over me. I looked at Spencer, who was still standing frozen in my office watching the live feed with wide, horrified eyes. You are very proud of that medical degree, Chloe, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You love telling everyone that you are the golden child who achieved black excellence while I was the ugly dropout. But since we are clearing the air today, I think the world deserves to know exactly how you earned that prestigious white coat. What are you doing? Chloe screamed, her panic reaching a fever pitch. Cut the feed. Someone cut her off right now. She is insane. I ignored her screaming and addressed the host directly. I just sent an email to your producer's private inbox, I announced smoothly. I also copied the top 50 news outlets in the country, the state medical board, and every major hospital administration network in the state. I suggest you open that email and read the contents to your millions of listeners right now. The host did not hesitate. The promise of the ultimate viral scoop overpowered any journalistic caution. He clicked his mouse rapidly, his eyes scanning the documents that had just populated on his studio monitor. His jaw dropped and he pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose, leaning closer to the screen to make sure he was reading it correctly. These are transcripts, the host said aloud, his voice echoing with absolute disbelief. These are the internal academic transcripts from your medical school, Chloe. Chloe let out a guttural scream, covering her ears and curling into a tight ball in her studio chair. Read the grades, I commanded quietly. The host cleared his throat, looking completely disgusted as he read the undeniable proof of Chloe's academic failures to the massive live audience. Advanced anatomy failed. Clinical pharmacology failed. Pediatric rotations failed. He looked up from the screen, staring at the sobbing golden child. You failed almost every single core requirement in your third and fourth years. You were facing academic expulsion. How did you even graduate? Scroll down to the second attachment. I instructed, my voice devoid of any mercy. The host scrolled down and clicked on the next file. These are internal emails from Richard Washington to the dean of the medical school. The host read aloud, his tone shifting from shock to pure outrage. Your father transferred $500,000 from an offshore account, disguised as a charitable hospital donation, directly to the dean's private foundation. In exchange, the dean manually altered your failing grades and pushed you through the graduation registry. You did not pass medical school, Chloe. Your father bought your medical license with the money he embezzled from cancer research grants. Chloe completely snapped. She ripped the heavy studio headphones off her head, throwing them violently against the soundproof glass of the recording booth. She scrambled out of her chair, screaming obscenities and knocking over a cup of water that spilled across the audio mixing board. She realized that in her desperate attempt to paint me as the villain, she had willingly walked into the greatest public execution in internet history. The podcast host slammed his hands down on the desk, completely turning on her live on the air. You came onto my platform and lied to my face, he shouted, pointing a furious finger at Chloe, who was trying to rip the studio door open. You sat here and cried about being a victim while you were living off stolen money and holding a fake medical license. You are a fraud. You and your parents are criminals. The live comment section on the screen flipped instantly. The very same people who had been calling for my arrest just 20 minutes ago were now forming a massive digital mob against Chloe. They were calling her a thief, a disgrace, and a privileged sociopath. The chat was moving so fast, the servers were struggling to keep up with the sheer volume of public outrage. The hashtag demanding Chloe's arrest was already trending #1 nationwide. I sat back in my leather chair watching the absolute destruction of my sister's entire existence broadcasting live in high definition. There was no screaming match. There was no physical fight. I had simply handed the internet the truth and let them tear the golden child apart piece by piece. My private executive phone buzzed on the desk. It was an automated news alert from a major medical journal. I glanced at the notification and a slow, deeply satisfied smile spread across my face. The state medical board had just issued a massive emergency public statement. Based on the undeniable evidence dropped during the live broadcast, they were launching an immediate emergency review of Chloe Washington Sterling. Her temporary medical privileges were suspended pending a full criminal investigation into academic fraud and bribery. The Golden Doctor was officially dead. I reached out and calmly pressed the button to end the call, leaving Chloe trapped in the studio to face the wrath of the world entirely on her own. 6 months had passed since the live broadcast that completely dismantled my sister's fake victim narrative. The swift wheels of federal justice had finally dragged my parents out of their luxurious denial and placed them directly into the stark reality of a federal courtroom in downtown Atlanta. The atmosphere inside the room was suffocatingly tense. The wooden benches were packed tightly with local journalists, former hospital board members, and curious onlookers who had been following the spectacular downfall of the Washington medical dynasty. My parents had spared absolutely no expense for their legal representation. They had liquidated their remaining hidden assets to hire one of the most expensive and notoriously aggressive defense attorneys in the state. He was a slick, fast-talking man in a custom-tailored charcoal suit who specialized in making guilty people look like tragic victims of circumstance. Richard and Patricia sat at the defense table looking significantly older than they had on the marble patio in Malibu. The stress of the impending trial and the total loss of their social standing had aged them a decade. My mother wore a plain beige blouse and a conservative skirt, a desperate attempt to look humble and unassuming. My father sat with his shoulders hunched, staring straight ahead, but his jaw constantly clenched and unclenched, betraying his deep-seated rage. They still believed they could win. They still believed that their elite status would somehow shield them from the consequences of stealing from their own child. The trial began with the defense attorney painting a vivid and entirely fabricated picture of me. He paced back and forth in front of the jury box, speaking with rehearsed passion. He described me as a deeply troubled estranged daughter who had harbored a vicious grudge for over a decade. He told the jury that my parents were dedicated healers who had made difficult but necessary decisions to protect a mentally unstable teenager. He twisted the narrative, claiming that my massive corporate success was built on a foundation of bitter vengeance, and that I had orchestrated this entire federal trial simply to punish my loving parents for holding me to a high standard. He tried to argue that the $2.5 million was not stolen, but rather legally managed by concerned parents who were terrified their sick would squander her inheritance. The defense lawyer waved his hands, dramatically calling my actions a ruthless corporate coup designed to destroy an innocent black family. He leaned heavily on their medical reputation, reminding the jury of how many lives Richard and Dr. Patricia Washington had supposedly saved throughout their long careers. It was a disgusting display of manipulation intended to make the jury doubt my motives rather than focus on the hard financial evidence. I sat at the prosecution table perfectly still and completely unbothered by his theatrical performance. I knew that his emotional appeals would shatter the moment the actual numbers were introduced into evidence. The defense spent hours trying to dissect my corporate acquisitions, claiming that my purchase of Atlanta General Hospital was an act of personal malice rather than a legitimate business transaction. They brought up character witnesses from the country club who testified about my parents' generosity and charitable donations, completely ignoring the fact that those donations were funded by embezzled hospital grants. The lawyer tried to paint my parents as pillars of black excellence who were being unfairly targeted by a broken system and a vindictive child. It was infuriating to listen to the blatant revision of history, but I kept my face blank. I did not glare at them. I did not shift in my seat. I simply watched the lawyer spin his web of lies, waiting for my turn to speak. My father looked over at me during a recess, a smug expression momentarily flashing across his face. He honestly thought the expensive lawyer had created enough reasonable doubt to save them from prison. He thought his title and his tailored suit would protect him just like they always had, but the courtroom is a place where facts eventually outweigh fiction, and I had brought an entire arsenal of undeniable facts to bury them with. When the court reconvened, it was finally time for the prosecution to present its case. The room grew entirely silent as the federal prosecutor called me to the stand. I stood up, smoothing the fabric of my dark navy business suit, and walked calmly toward the witness box. I did not look at my parents as I took the oath, swearing to tell the truth. I sat down, adjusting the microphone in front of me. The defense attorney leaned forward at his table, ready to object to every word I said, hoping to fluster me or provoke an emotional outburst. He wanted me to yell or cry so he could point to me and tell the jury that I was exactly the unstable, angry daughter he had described. But I had no tears left for Richard and Patricia Washington. The sadness and the anger had burned away years ago, leaving behind nothing but cold, analytical precision. I was not there to share my feelings or talk about my broken childhood. I was there to deliver a financial reckoning that they could not escape. The federal prosecutor began the questioning by asking me to identify a series of financial documents displayed on the monitors across the courtroom. I looked at the screens and began walking the jury through the exact paper trail of the stolen $2.5 million. My voice was steady and completely devoid of emotion as I explained the routing numbers and the offshore shell accounts my father had established. I presented the original trust documents signed by my grandmother, which clearly stated that the money was intended for my sole use without any stipulations regarding medical school or parental oversight. Then I presented the forged psychiatric evaluations my father had submitted to the court 11 years ago. I pointed out the discrepancies in the dates and the fact that the authorizing signature belonged to a doctor who was actively receiving kickbacks from my mother. I explained how they had used these fake evaluations to declare me legally incompetent, stripping me of my rights and granting themselves full access to the trust fund. The defense attorney jumped up, shouting objections and trying to break my rhythm. He claimed the documents were circumstantial and demanded to know why I had waited 11 years to come forward if I truly believed I was robbed. I looked directly at the jury and answered without hesitation, because 11 years ago, I was a homeless teenager freezing on the streets with zero resources while the chief of surgery held all my stolen wealth. I stated clearly. It took me a decade to build the corporate infrastructure and the financial power necessary to conduct a forensic audit that could bypass his elite protections. I did not wait because I wanted to. I waited because I had to survive first. The jury nodded slowly, completely absorbed by the cold, hard reality of my testimony. The defense attorney's aggressive tactics were failing spectacularly because I refused to give him the emotional breakdown he desperately needed. I simply continued to read the bank transfer logs showing exactly how my parents had moved the stolen funds from the trust account into their private portfolios and eventually into the wedding dowry account created for Chloe. The real turning point of the trial came when the prosecution called their next key witness. The heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom opened, and Spencer walked in. The former aristocratic groom looked absolutely miserable. He was wearing a plain gray suit, and his face was pale with anxiety. Spencer had been subpoenaed by the federal government, and he had agreed to testify for the prosecution in exchange for immunity regarding his involvement in the hospital acquisition audits. My parents stared at him in utter betrayal as he took the stand. Spencer avoided looking at them, keeping his eyes fixed on the judge. The prosecutor asked Spencer about his interactions with my father in the days following the disastrous wedding in Malibu. Spencer swallowed hard, gripping the edges of the witness stand. He testified that Richard Washington had contacted him secretly, begging him to use his position at Apex Health Partners to destroy the financial evidence. Spencer revealed that my father had offered him a massive bribe of $500,000 and highly classified medical research data if he would simply delete the audit files and help silence me. The courtroom erupted into shocked whispers. The defense attorney tried to object, but the judge overruled him instantly. Spencer detailed how Richard had threatened to ruin his career if he did not comply, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that my father knew exactly what he was doing and was actively trying to cover up his federal crimes. Spencer admitted that he refused the bribe because he was terrified of my corporate retaliation and chose to hand the recorded phone calls directly over to the FBI instead. The defense completely crumbled in that exact moment. The expensive attorney rubbed his forehead, realizing that his clients had essentially handed the prosecution a recorded confession of witness tampering and attempted bribery. My parents sank lower into their chairs, the arrogant medical dynasty illusion finally shattering into a million irreparable pieces. Their high-priced lawyer could not save them from their own desperate stupidity. The closing arguments were brief. The evidence was so overwhelmingly decisive that the jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning to the courtroom. The foreman stood up and read the verdict, delivering a relentless string of guilty pronouncements. Guilty of grand larceny, guilty of wire fraud, guilty of embezzlement, guilty of witness tampering. With each word, my mother let out a quiet, broken sob, while my father simply stared at the floor, his hands shaking uncontrollably. The judge, a stern woman with zero tolerance for corruption, ordered them to stand for sentencing. The courtroom was dead silent as she looked down at the two disgraced doctors. "You took an oath to heal and protect," the judge began, her voice dripping with profound disgust. "But you used your prestigious medical titles as weapons to destroy your own daughter and steal her future. You forged psychiatric evaluations, violating the very core of medical ethics, simply to fund your lavish lifestyle and fuel your own arrogance. You are a disgrace to the medical profession and a disgrace as parents." The judge adjusted her glasses, looking over the sentencing guidelines before delivering the final crushing blow. "Richard and Patricia Washington, I sentence you both to 7 years in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. Furthermore, you are ordered to pay full restitution to Naomi Washington in the amount of $2.5 million plus 11 years of compounded interest, totaling over $4 million. Your remaining assets will be liquidated to satisfy this debt immediately." My mother wailed, openly collapsing against the defense table as the federal marshals moved in with handcuffs. My father did not fight back. He held his hands out, his face completely devoid of color as the cold metal snapped around his wrists. The proud, wealthy doctors who had spent their entire lives looking down on everyone else were now being led out of the courtroom in shackles, shuffling toward a cage where their titles meant absolutely nothing. I watched them go, feeling a deep, profound sense of closure. I did not smile, and I did not gloat. I simply gathered my files and placed them into my briefcase. The long chapter of my childhood trauma finally concluding with the slam of the heavy wooden courtroom doors. Up in the visitor gallery, sitting entirely alone in the back row, was Chloe. She was wearing dark sunglasses and a trench coat, trying desperately to hide from the local press who had been hounding her since the wedding disaster. She watched our parents being hauled away to federal prison, her face frozen in absolute terror. Her safety net was gone. Her stolen dowry was seized. Her perfect life was completely eradicated. She pulled her phone out of her pocket with trembling hands, staring at the screen as a new notification popped up. It was an official email marked urgent from the State Medical Board of Administrators. Chloe opened the message, her eyes scanning the text as her breathing grew shallow and panicked. The email detailed the findings of the emergency investigation into her academic records, confirming the bribery and the forged clinical rotations. Her fingers shook so violently, she almost dropped the device as she read the final devastating sentence regarding her immediate future. The medical board had formally and permanently revoked her medical license, effective immediately stripping her of the doctor title she worshipped. Her entire identity had just vanished into thin air. She stared blindly at the glowing screen, realizing her golden child status was gone forever. She let out a quiet, broken whimper, clutching the phone to her chest as the heavy reality of her total destruction washed over her. It was real. 1 month had passed since the heavy wooden doors of the federal courthouse closed on the Washington medical dynasty, forever marking the absolute end of their reign of terror. The deafening echoes of Chloe, screaming in the rain outside the courthouse steps, her ruined wedding dress soaked in muddy puddles, had long faded from my memory. Those chaotic sounds were now replaced by the quiet, soothing hum of the central air conditioning inside my private, glass-walled penthouse suite, located at the very top of the Apex Health Partners Tower. Sitting comfortably at my massive, custom-built mahogany desk, I looked out through the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered an unobstructed panoramic view of the bustling Atlanta skyline. The city stretched out before me for miles, bathed in the warm golden light of the early morning sun, a stark contrast to the freezing, brutal blizzard I had been violently thrown into 11 years ago. I was no longer the scared, desperate teenager fighting for a tiny scrap of warmth on the unforgiving pavement. I was the absolute, undisputed ruler of a multi-billion-dollar healthcare empire sitting at the very peak of the city that had once watched me freeze, and I had done it all without a single drop of their help. A soft, hesitant knock at my office door broke the peaceful morning silence. "Enter," I commanded, my voice smooth and carrying the effortless, terrifying authority of someone who held absolute power over everyone in the building. The heavy wooden door slowly creaked open, and Spencer walked in carrying a polished silver tray with a single cup of black coffee and a thick stack of legal documents. The man who had once stood on a Malibu patio, dressed in a bespoke tuxedo, preparing to marry into a prominent medical family, was now nothing more than a terrified subordinate, bringing me my morning caffeine. His aristocratic arrogance, his old money confidence had been completely eradicated, leaving behind a pale, sweating corporate drone who knew his entire livelihood depended on my continued mercy. Spencer's hands trembled violently, causing the delicate porcelain coffee cup to rattle softly against the silver tray as he approached my desk. He carefully set the coffee down, avoiding eye contact, entirely terrified that a single misplaced glance or incorrect breath would cause me to terminate his career permanently. "Good morning, Miss Washington," Spencer stammered, his voice cracking with severe anxiety. "I have the final liquidation documents you requested regarding the residential estate." I picked up my platinum fountain pen and pulled the heavy stack of legal papers towards me. These were not just ordinary corporate documents. These were the final foreclosure and asset liquidation papers for the sprawling Atlanta mansion that my parents had proudly paraded around in for decades. The federal court had ordered all their remaining assets seized and sold to satisfy the $4 million debt they owed me. I looked down at the pristine white paper, feeling a deep, profound sense of poetic justice washing over me. I calmly signed my name at the bottom of the page, officially authorizing the bank to sell the very home where my mother had called me a defect and my father had ripped up my passport. They were currently sitting in separate federal prison cells, stripped of their designer clothes and wearing standard-issue jumpsuits, while I signed away the very walls that had once housed their toxic pride. The money from the sale would go directly into my accounts, leaving them with absolutely nothing to their names. Spencer stood perfectly still, waiting for my next command, sweating through the stiff collar of his dress shirt. "That will be all, Spencer," I said coldly, not even looking up at him as I flipped to the next page. He scrambled backward, thanking me profusely before practically running out of the office and shutting the door tight behind him, glad to have survived another interaction with me. I slid the foreclosure documents to the side of my desk and reached for the final folder sitting in my private inbox. This document was significantly different from the others. It was not a corporate acquisition, a hostile takeover, or a legal settlement. It was a massive $10 million grant, transferring funds directly from my private wealth accounts to establish a brand new nonprofit organization. I had named it the Washington Survivors Fund, a charity dedicated strictly to providing emergency housing, legal counsel, and full college scholarships to African American youth who had been emotionally abused, scapegoated, or financially cut off by their toxic, status-obsessed parents. My parents had spent their entire careers pretending to be pillars of the Black community, standing at galas and accepting awards, while secretly destroying their own daughter behind closed doors just to maintain their flawless image. I was going to use the exact same wealth I had reclaimed from their greedy hands to actually save the children they would have otherwise ignored or discarded. I signed the $10 million transfer order, sealing my promise to make sure no other kid would ever have to freeze on the streets just because they did not fit into their parents' narcissistic plans for high society domination. I set the platinum pen down and slowly stood up from my comfortable leather executive chair. I walked over to the towering glass windows and pressed my hand against the cool, smooth surface, looking down at the sprawling corporate empire I had built entirely from the ashes of my broken childhood. The journey had been agonizing, filled with sleepless nights, empty bank accounts, and a pain so deep it threatened to swallow me whole on my darkest days. But looking back at everything that had transpired, I realized that every single moment of suffering had been a necessary step in forging the unbreakable titanium armor I wore today. I had walked through the fire and emerged completely untouched by their venom. For 18 years, they made me believe I was a defect in their perfect medical dynasty. They tried to bury me, but they didn't realize I was a seed. They lost their freedom, their money, and their precious titles. As for me, I didn't just survive the Washington family. I bought them out. And trust me, the ROI has been absolutely beautiful. True power comes from walking away from toxic environments and your own worth. Blood does not dictate family or loyalty. When you stop seeking validation from people who are committed to misunderstanding you, you gain the freedom to construct an empire. The ultimate revenge is never about destroying others, but elevating yourself to a height where their cruel opinions no longer matter. By turning their harsh rejection into pure motivation, you transform your deepest pain into absolute unshakable success. You alone are the brilliant architect of your own destiny. Regardless of the shadows in your broken past, move forward. If you have ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your peace, please share your story in the comments below.